Imagine living in one of Europe's sunniest, most affordable countries and only to realize it's no longer yours. Portugal, once a quiet coastal paradise, is now at the center of a growing storm. Rising prices, vanishing homes, and locals being pushed out of the very neighborhoods they built. But what's really happening behind the scenes? Is it just tourism and expats, or is something deeper unfolding? Welcome to Geo Capitalist, where we decode global wealth one map at a time. Go and grab your coffee, and let's get into it. Oh boy, it's not what you think. Because behind Portugal's postcard image of sunlit plazas and golden beaches lies a hidden story, one of dislocation, imbalance, and global transformation. In Lisbon, housing prices have jumped over 250% in less than a decade. And while investors and tourists pour in, locals are priced out, sometimes forced to become housekeepers in the very homes they grew up in. This isn't just a housing issue. It's a complete economic restructuring, one that has turned Portugal into a global investment hotspot, but at a cost few could have predicted. And the world is watching, because what's happening in Portugal today could happen in Spain, Greece, Croatia, or anywhere where globalization meets fragile local economies. In this video, we'll dive into the core of Portugal's crisis, the real reasons it spiraled so fast, and how one small country became a cautionary tale for the rest of Europe and the world. So brace yourself. We're about to decode the real reason why living in Portugal has become impossible. Subscribe and let's get into it. It wasn't long ago that Portugal was considered Europe's hidden gem, an affordable haven where a modest salary could still secure a decent life. In cities like Lisbon and Porto, young families could dream of owning a home, and retirees could enjoy their golden years without burning through their savings. But that Portugal is fading fast. In just over a decade, property prices in Lisbon surged more than 250%. In 2022 alone, prices jumped by 20%. Today, a one-bedroom apartment in Lisbon can cost up to $2,275 per month, double the country's monthly minimum wage of $995, and the average salary isn't much better. Now imagine being a young nurse or teacher earning $1,365 a month and trying to pay rent, buy groceries, and cover basic living expenses. It's no wonder that over half of Portuguese adults aged 25 to 34 still live with their parents. Not out of choice, but necessity. And that's not all. Lisbon has one of the lowest housing construction rates in Europe and one of the most complex zoning systems, making it extremely difficult to build affordable housing. This has created a perfect storm: skyrocketing demand, limited supply, and a policy environment that favors short-term gains over long-term sustainability. Meanwhile, short-term rentals like Airbnb have exploded. In neighborhoods like Alfama, 60% of homes are now used for tourists. Locals are being priced out of their own streets. And so the quiet exodus begins, not with outrage, but with resignation. And that's why living in Portugal has become impossible, not because people don't love their country, but because the system no longer makes space for them. Let's now go deeper into what triggered this spiral. On the surface, Portugal still feels like a dream. Colorful coastlines, sunny weather, cobbled streets filled with charm. It's no wonder millions of tourists and expats fall in love with it each year. But behind this picture-perfect paradise, a different reality unfolds for those who call it home. In Lisbon and Porto, rents have surged by over 60% in just 4 years. A one-bedroom flat in a central neighborhood now exceeds $1,250, while the minimum wage remains at $950. Even skilled workers earning above average struggle to pay for housing, utilities, and transport, let alone save for a future. In fact, more than half of Portuguese adults under 35 still live with their parents, not out of choice, but necessity. What's worse, this housing pressure isn't driven by population growth. It's driven by demand from abroad. As short-term rentals dominate historic neighborhoods and wealthy investors snatch up properties for golden visas or passive income, locals are squeezed out of their own cities. Portugal now has one of the highest housing stock per household ratios in Europe, 1.4 homes for every household. Yet people can't afford to live in them. Many sit empty, held as speculative investments or rented on platforms like Airbnb. Meanwhile, young Portuguese families are forced to abandon urban life, migrate abroad, or remain stuck in multi-generational homes. This is the cost of turning a country into an open-air resort, a paradise for some, but increasingly a trap for those born there. The facade of beauty hides a deep imbalance. Go ahead and comment below. Have you witnessed this paradox in your own city or country? We'd love to hear your perspective, because these hidden forces are shaping all of our futures. Oh boy, it's not what you think. It didn't happen overnight. After the 2008 global financial crisis, Portugal faced rising debt, mass unemployment, and a collapsing construction sector. Desperate for a lifeline, the government turned to a seductive solution: foreign investment. In 2012, they launched the now infamous Golden Visa program, granting residency to wealthy outsiders in exchange for property purchases worth at least €500,000. On paper, it was a win-win: attract cash, revive real estate, boost jobs. In practice, it was the beginning of a slow, irreversible transformation. Developers began pricing homes at exactly €500,000 to meet the visa threshold. Entire neighborhoods were renovated, not for locals, but for investors. Properties remained empty, flipping hands for profit while locals searched endlessly for affordable housing. In Lisbon alone, property values surged over 250% in just one decade, but wages didn't. Localized fact: from 2012 to 2022, average wages in Portugal rose by just 13%, while house prices in some areas soared by more than 300%. At the same time, a flood of short-term rentals saturated the market, further reducing long-term housing options. In Alfama, one of Lisbon's most historic quarters, 60% of homes are now Airbnbs. The dream of home ownership? For many, it vanished, and with it the ability to build stable families, plan for the future, or feel rooted in a place once called home. Worse still, many of the Golden Visa recipients didn't even live in Portugal. They held the keys to empty homes, while locals were locked out. Go and grab more coffee, because up next, we'll reveal how this crisis isn't just about housing. It's about who truly owns a nation's future, and who gets left behind when it's sold off, one asset at a time. Leading economists and urban planners have been sounding the alarm for years. Portugal's housing market is no longer sustainable. But the real warning lies in what this situation reveals about economic fragility across much of Europe. A 2023 report by the OECD placed Portugal among the worst in Western Europe for housing affordability and youth economic mobility. That means if you're born into poverty in Lisbon or Porto, your chances of escaping it are lower than in most European countries, including Spain, Italy, and even parts of Eastern Europe. Consider this. While Lisbon's housing prices have soared by over 250% in the last decade, wages have barely moved. The average monthly income in Portugal remains under $1,400, yet a modest one-bedroom apartment in Lisbon often costs over $1,500 per month to rent. In cities like Munich or Amsterdam, housing is expensive, but at least wages offer some buffer. In Portugal, there's no such cushion. Experts warn this imbalance creates what's called an extraction economy, one in which wealth flows out of the country into the hands of foreign investors, rather than circulating within. It's the same pattern seen in Greece post-2008 and now emerging in parts of southern Italy. But Portugal's vulnerability is heightened by its economic overdependence on volatile sectors like tourism and real estate. According to Eurostat, nearly 20% of the country's GDP is tied to tourism, a figure that places it among the top 5 in Europe. And this figure is not just high, it's risky. A sudden drop in tourism, political instability, or changes in visa regulations could send economic shockwaves throughout the country. And as we've already seen, the burden of that instability doesn't fall on tourists or digital nomads. It falls on the working class. Oh boy. This isn't just about Portugal. It's a global pattern, and we're only scratching the surface. Portugal's crisis is more than just local. It's a mirror reflecting back the struggles of nations caught between economic opportunity and dependency. And the warning signs aren't just blinking in Lisbon. Across the globe, countries are selling access to land, property, and institutions in exchange for quick injections of foreign capital. But this raises a critical question. What happens when the price of that capital is long-term sovereignty? Take New Zealand, for example. In the early 2010s, the country became a hotspot for foreign property buyers, especially from China and the US. This led to skyrocketing housing costs in Auckland, pushing locals out and creating a wave of discontent. By 2018, the government was forced to ban most foreigners from buying existing homes. It was a bold move, but it came after years of damage. Portugal now faces a similar dilemma. The Golden Visa program generated over €7 billion, and short-term rental platforms flooded major cities with tourists. But this short-term revenue came at the cost of livability for locals. Neighborhoods once filled with families are now silent during the off-season. Local culture is giving way to temporary convenience. And this isn't just a European story. In places like Thailand, Colombia, and South Africa, the same dynamic is taking shape. Foreign dollars driving up local costs, while local wages remain flat. It's a silent gentrification, only this time, it's global. The core issue? When governments prioritize foreign investors over their own people, they trade long-term stability for short-term gain. It's a fragile economic model, one that can collapse under the slightest pressure, and the consequences go beyond economics. As locals lose access to housing, opportunity, and stability, resentment builds. Protests ignite, trust in leadership erodes, social cohesion begins to fray. Whoa, hold up, this is not what it looks like. Because what's coming next will reveal how history is repeating itself, and how Portugal's present could become many nations' future. It's easy to talk about numbers, property prices, wages, GDP percentages, but behind every chart is a real person, living through quiet battles that no statistic can fully capture. Meet Sophia. She's 29, born and raised in Lisbon. She works 2 part-time jobs in retail and tourism, earning just enough to survive. Her parents owned a small home in Alfama, but when the area became a hot spot for short-term rentals, their building was sold. They were evicted. Now they live 2 hours away in a rural town, disconnected from their old community. Sophia dreams of starting her own business. But with rent consuming over 60% of her income, saving is nearly impossible. She's not lazy. She's not irresponsible. She's trapped in a system designed to benefit those already ahead. Her story isn't unique. Across Portugal and in cities around the world, a growing generation is being priced out of the very places they call home. They're not failing, they're being failed. The erosion of the middle class isn't just an economic issue, it's a spiritual one. When people can't see a future, they stop planning, they stop believing, they leave. And when enough people leave, what's left behind isn't just empty apartments. It's an empty dream, a shell of a nation that looks prosperous in brochures, but feels hollow to those who live there. This is what happens when profit becomes the only metric of success. When homes are seen as assets, not shelter. When tourism is prioritized over community. When governments look abroad for wealth while their people struggle at home. The cost isn't just rising rent, its rising hopelessness. But history has shown us something else too. That when people are pushed to the edge, they eventually push back. Well, this just got interesting, because the real test isn't economic, it's human, and Portugal is not alone in this. Portugal's story isn't just a local crisis, it's a mirror, reflecting what happens when nations prioritize short-term growth over long-term sustainability, when homes become investment vehicles and citizens become collateral damage. The warning signs are flashing in other nations too. In Greece, entire neighborhoods are turning into Airbnb districts, forcing locals out. In the US, cities like Austin and Miami face soaring housing costs driven by tech booms and out-of-state investors. In Australia, even full-time professionals are struggling to afford homes in the cities they work in. The patterns repeat. Different places, same consequences. It's not that people don't want to live in Portugal, it's that they feel they no longer can. And that distinction matters, because it's the same silent truth echoing in cities from San Francisco to Seoul, from Toronto to Barcelona. And now the question is, who's next? Which nations will take the bold steps to rebalance their economies, to protect communities, and to ensure their young people aren't forced to flee? And which will continue selling their cities to the highest bidder until their national identity becomes nothing more than a brochure? We don't need to look away from this, we need to look closer. Because the deeper we look, the more we see the fault lines forming, lines that could decide not only the future of Portugal, but the economic destiny of entire generations around the globe. At this channel, our mission is to illuminate these stories, not with fear, but with clarity, and to connect the dots between data, geography, and people's lived realities. If you found this breakdown eye-opening, I recommend you watch my next video, which complements this one perfectly. Subscribe to the channel and join us every week as we map the forces shaping our world, one story at a time. This was The Real Reason Why Living in Portugal Has Become Impossible. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.